Welcome back to another stream. I'm Shango, and this is I'm Shango Tech. As you can see by the title, we are wondering which MacBook or which Mac Mini should I get. And I've been seeing a lot of reviews. A lot of persons are now with their MacBook, Mac M1, M2 Mac Mini. Sorry, a lot of persons received their M2 Mac Mini. Apple releasing the M2 Mac Mini on the 24th, meaning that it will reach persons by the 24th. It's now the 25th, so a lot of persons have gotten their Mac Mini, and a lot of persons are doing tests. Most of our favorite YouTubers have gotten their Mac Mini. MKHB has his Mac Mini. Dave 2D has the Mac Mini. Sarah Dici, not Sarah Dici, iJustine, sorry, has our Mac Mini. So most of our favorite YouTubers, Carl has his Mac Mini. So most of the favorite YouTubers basically receive their Mac Mini from Apple to do their testing, do their reviews, etc. Now, what I realized based on the information that most of the reviewers gave us is that Apple sent most of the reviewers the iron spec Mac Mini. And I was wondering why. Why would Apple send most of the reviewers the iron Mac Mini and not the base model? Because the base model is the $600 model, and if you're a student, you can get it for $500. So I'm kind of wondering, I've been wondering why. So based on a lot of the tests that I've seen, what they're saying is that the M2 Mac Mini, the base model, there is some small problems with it, especially when it comes to the SSD. So the 256 gig SSD has some problem. It has very low read and write speeds. And if you upgrade to the 512, you will get better read and write speed. But on the Apple website, the 512 is another configuration which starts at $799. So it bumps it up to $800 if you add the 512 configuration. So everything will remain the same. It's just the 512 configuration. I think it's 16 gigs of RAM. Let me check that out on Apple site so I can give you the exact information. So really and truly, the base model Mac Mini, yes, everything remains the same. The only thing changes is that instead of you have 256 gigs of SSD, you now have 512 SSD, which you're seeing right there. So the difference right there is that $599, which is $600 or $800, the difference between that is the 512 gigs of SSD. So what they're realizing based on the teardowns is that Apple did something different this year because the M1 Mac Mini had two storage chips in it. And when you have two storage chips that it can read from and write from, it tend to work better. But Apple, in the M1, the base model, M2 Mac Mini, there is a slot that is there that is not being used. And as I said, I've seen the teardown, I've seen Max Tech, going to the machine and kind of is comparing the M2 Mac Mini versus the M1 Mac Mini and what are the difference. And the M1 Mac Mini write and read speed, the same configuration base model, is actually better than the M2 Mac Mini. Weird. But really and truly, based on the reviews that I've seen, based on a lot of the stuff that I've seen, I realize that Apple did one on us with this base model Mac Mini. And I understand that this base model Mac Mini is not necessarily for the content creator. If you're a content creator, I will push you more towards this one, $1,299. That makes more sense. It has better CPU, it has better GPU. It starts at 16 gigs of unified memory, and the base model and the base for it is 512 gigs of SSD. So that will make you have good read and write speed. You have 16 gig of unified RAM and stuff like that. if I was choosing this model, you have some small thing that I would do in terms of like upgrading it. So I would possibly unified memory. The thing is that you can't go and change these things again, So you want to make the decision right here and now. And I would probably, especially if I'm using it for content creation, I would probably also go for the 12 core and 19 core GPU, which is an additional $300. So right now we're looking at $2,000. You can keep the 512 SSD storage because it's a Mac Mini. Again, it's a desktop, so you will be using this computer at your desk. And it's a Mac Mini. You can always add external storage. And external storage overall from Apple is super, super expensive. You can basically go and get the sub-brand storage and get it at basically half the price. So a 2 terabyte a 2 terabyte SSD storage from Apple is plus $600. I'm sure you can get a 2 terabyte storage for less than $300 or even $300 plus on Amazon from Subright, which, based on what MaxTech and persons online have been doing, they're showing you the best SSD that you can use. And the greatest thing about it, it is portable. So for instance, you have a Mac Mini and you also have a MacBook. You can now use the same SSD between your computers. So I am saying spend the $1,900 on this configuration, which is the configuration of the M2 Pro with 12 core CPU, 19 core GPU, 16 core neural engine, 32 gigs of unified memory, because you cannot change that, and the SSD, which you actually can purchase. You can connect your Mac Mini to a NAS or anything like that. You do that, and the only other upgrade that I believe that probably will worth the $100 is adding the 10 gigabit Ethernet, which brings it to $2,099, $2,100. The reason why the 10 gig internet, the 10 gigabit Ethernet might become important is just in case you will be using it, for instance, with a NAS and you're connected to a network. If you feel like you won't be using that at all, this computer have Wi-Fi 6E. So maybe getting a Wi-Fi 6E router, you can do everything wirelessly. But I believe that this 10 gigabit Ethernet, that $100 is worth it because, again, you cannot go and change these things. So you have to make a decision based on that. All right, then, I cannot go back and make any changes. So I am deciding now to buy this computer and purchase it in a way that it works for me, but at the same time, it has the possibility that in the future, if you change, if you go to, for instance, a NAS or a more network-like system, you have a 10 gigabit Ethernet, so you are not using a USB-C or any of that to transfer data. In terms of the storage, again, I believe that the 512 could work. I personally would upgrade to 1 terabyte because depending on what you're doing, especially if you're a content creator, 1 terabyte would probably bring it to 2,300. This 2,300 though is kind of pushing you into the Mac Studio territory. So let's take a look at the Mac Studio and see where the Mac Studio is in terms of cost. The base model. So the base model of the Mac Studio, well, whoa. And that's a Mac Studio Max M1. 2,300. Let me see what 2,300 can give you, and I'll tell you if it makes sense to just go and get a Mac Studio. Oh, shoot. Nah. Nah, when you reach that 2,000, it makes sense to get a Mac Studio because the 2,000 probably, even though it's an M1, is an M1 Max. And an M1 Max technically is better than an M2 Pro. technically. I think because of the newness of it and the M2 architecture, there's some beneficial thing about the M2 architecture. Now the M1 Max with 10 core and 32 core, we're comparing that to the M2 Pro with 8 cores. No, with no. Like let me bring up with both of them, because in order to compare it, I have to have both of them on the screen. Wow. I wasn't thinking about the M2, the Max Studio, That's why I didn't have it ready. But it won't take me too long to get there. I'm gonna look on the configuration that I had before. (19 core, 32 gigs, and 512). All right, so no 1 terabyte, 10 gigabit Ethernet. All right, so we're looking at 2,300 for the M2 Pro in the Mac Mini, and that configuration is 12 core 12 core CPU, 19 core GPU. Now we're looking at the Max Studio, M1 Max Studio with 10 core CPU and 32 core GPU. 32 gigs of unified memory and 512 storage. And it's 2,200, my mistake. Sorry, 2,200. Now the M2 Pro, 12 core CPU, 19 core GPU, 32 gigs of memory, 1 terabyte storage for 2,300. So we're talking about $100 difference, and you get. Let me upgrade this to that. So literally with $100 more, you can get a Mac Studio with more less CPU core, more GPU core, and I'm talking about content creator, persons who are gonna use this machine to do professional work, or even a hobbyist who does editing and those stuff. If you're going into this price, I'm really recommending the Mac Studio. Mind you, the M2 architecture is much faster with certain things, and it's a better architecture. It's on the same 5 nanometer processor, but 5 nanometer process, but it still is a better architecture in terms of certain things. But when it comes to these prices are very close. And we're talking about the Max chip versus the Pro chip. And with $100 more, instead of buying a Pro, instead of buying the M2 Mac Mini, you can get the M1 Max Studio. It comes with an SD card at the front. It comes with 6 Thunderbolt. I don't know if it's Thunderbolt 4, but it comes with 6 Thunderbolt on it, so you can plug in multiple devices. Oh, so it's 4 Thunderbolt 4 and 2 USB-A port. So what about the front one? Oh, it's 2 USB-C port. So the USB-C's at the front is not Thunderbolt. So it still just have 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports like the Pro. However, you have additional USB. So you have additional I/O that you can use depending on how you're using it. It comes with a SD card, so you wouldn't have to go and purchase that. Whoa, it's a hard decision. I can't recommend the M2 Mac Mini. I can't recommend the M2 Mac Mini at this cost. So let's bring it back and get back to the 512. And probably, because even the 512, I don't know if I can recommend the 512. I don't know if I can even recommend the 512, because once you go to 512, we are looking at $100 more, and you can get a Mac Studio with more core CPU. And as a matter of fact, let's go back to the original. The original Mac Studio Max, M1 Max, Mac Studio Max is actually less, but you have less core GPU and less core CPU. So, wow, it's really difficult to recommend this Mac Mini with this upgrade. So the only way to recommend this Mac Mini is basically to do the base model and maybe upgrade the unified memory, because you can't change that, which is $1,800. Anything beyond that, you're looking at Mac Studio prices. And the features that you get with the Mac Studio, the additional stuff like the SD card reader. Mind you, it's a slow SD card reader. It's not the fastest. So if you're a person who is using certain type of memory cards, then the memory card reader on the Mac Studio wouldn't even make any sense to you. But wow, man, this is very complicated. Now, Apple is known for doing this. Apple is known for making their stuff very, very complicated. Very complicated, very difficult to deal with, very hard to choose, so to speak. And because of this complication, most times you find yourself in a middle ground. You are, I wouldn't call it bombarded, but they normally give you that three choice type of vibes. And the middle ground, which is what they did with the Mac Mini, they gave you a middle ground, which is the $799, which if you start from the base model and add the additional SSD, you get to that. But based on what MaxTech and some of the other reviewers are saying, is that model is really the sweet spot, not the $599, because the $599, the read and write speed are not great. For a person who is not necessarily a content creator who just want a computer but want to be in the Mac world or the Apple ecosystem, I would recommend for them to spend the $600 or $500 if you're a student. But remember, you still have to get keyboard, mouse, and a monitor. So if you spend under $1,000, I believe that you can get these things. And I think my previous video, I kind of walk you through monitors that you can get under $500 or under $400 or a little bit above $500, which can suffice and give you a good color accuracy and all of that. But I don't know. I still have to applaud. Oh, that's loud. I still have to applaud Apple with this thing though. I still have to give them applaud, because Apple has been changing the game in terms of computing. There is no Windows computer that can compete with these prices. None. And if you're a person who wants to pay it monthly, we're talking about $50 a month. That's easy. $67 a month. That's easy. You know what I mean? Yeah, once you're a working person, even a student who gets allowance can actually buy this computer and pay for it monthly. Wow. And it's zero APR too, so you wouldn't necessarily, well, that is if you have the Apple Card. But wow, I am super impressed. But again, it really comes down to what you are, who you are, what you're doing with your computer. You will determine which one of these works best for you. All right, guys, that's another one. I'm Shango. See you in the next one. Bless up yourself.